Hello friendos and randos, welcome to another video. Today we are covering the OP04 meta tier list. For the western side of things, I do take into consideration the bans and everything as well. While I am not playing on the western side of things, I have been looking at the tournament results as well as some of the usual top decks. So I think in general, although the western meta does still differ a little from the east, generally the leaders you see are still probably gonna be the same. Also, this got really long, so I'm gonna be making it a two-part video. So let's get into it. First, I wanted to talk about the new leaders coming up and how I think they are in the meta at the moment. And then I think there's a very clear divide as to what is strong and what isn't that strong for the new leaders at the moment. So out of the new leaders, I think the strongest leaders are probably Rebecca, Flamingo, and Queen. And then after that it's Vivi, and then the other two are probably around this range. Okay, so let's rate the new leaders first and then talk a little bit about why they're so good too. So out of all of these six, I think Rebecca is definitely the strongest one in the current meta. And I understand that the English meta has a few changes, like the restrictions on Radical Beam, Newgate, and 4-cost Marco. But I think Rebecca is still one of the strongest leaders out of the new set. The main reason being she has a very strong matchup into Zorro and Red Green Law, and her deck is actually pretty frustrating to play against as well as either Newgate or Kinemon or any of the other green leaders. Basically, as long as you aren't a blue or a yellow leader, Rebecca has a pretty good matchup into you, and it's actually pretty frustrating to deal with as well. The one exception to this as a red leader, I think, is Ace. I think Ace has a pretty decent matchup into Rebecca due to the ability to remove most of her large threats very easily. But other than that, she has a pretty good matchup spread across the board. She also is pretty good into the new Green Purple Doflamingo, which was quite a meta contender at the start of the set. That being said, I think Green Purple Doflamingo is probably the other best leader of the new set right now. He's also one of the strongest leaders at the start of the JP meta as well. You saw him top very consistently, and he even won, I think, the first or the second one in Hero. Most of the decks that you will see are very based around the film engine. So the things that Doflamingo is good at as flooding the board with the 7-cost Luffy as well as the 4-cost Brook, and continuously generating hand advantage with the Nami Searcher as well as the Guild Tesoro. The film version of Doflamingo is the most popular version, so the new Don Quixote family cards weren't really used very often, with the exception of Sugar, the 10-cost Doflamingo, and some decks were running Diamante as well. But you can see, in general, all of them were using the film-focused engine. They were using the draw engine of Guild Tesoro as well as the 3-cost Nami Searcher in order to keep their hand size large. And then after that, use the 10-cost Doflamingo to stun the characters as well as your opponent's leader and prevented them from doing any more damage to you. On top of that, being able to restand your blockers like your 4-cost Uta as well as your 7-cost Luffy with the Spiderweb event as well as Paradise Waterfall for some of them that ran it, meant that this deck was very, very good defensively, and because of that consistent draw engine, was able to keep up that high level of defense even late into the game. Rebecca, Red Green Law, and Crocodile were some of the really bad matchups for Green Purple Doflamingo. And then other than that, it had a pretty even matchup or even advantages into decks like Nami, Katakuri, and Whitebeard. So that was why it was a very strong deck at the start. And it's also very advantageous into Red Zorro too. So these are some of the reasons it was a pretty good meta deck at the start of the format. But it did eventually lose a lot of steam, especially because of the rising popularity of Red Green Law as well as Queen and Rebecca. So speaking of Queen will also be up here. He was, I think, the highest placing that Queen got in a tournament was 2nd place at one of the early CSs. This was one that was won by a Newgate in the end. But at the same time, the Queen, if you actually watch the CS, the Queen actually only won the top 16 match because of a misplay on the loss end. Like, he actually had enough counter, but then he said he didn't have enough and said he lost, and so the judge ruled it as the Queen's win. And I think the Queen was aware of that as well. So you can see it in his tweet about the event as well, that he wasn't really sure if he deserved the win. So basically, in my heart, Queen's highest rating is probably top 16 at a large tournament so far, although by the official records he did get top 2. I think Queen is a very powerful deck, and the reason that a lot of Asian players weren't actually on him is because of the timeout rules in Asia, which is that if you do hit time at the 30 or 35-minute mark, both players will get a loss instead of playing out or like last 3 turns or anything about life counts or anything like that. So those tiebreaker rules make Queen quite unattractive to play as a leader because of the playstyle being very stall focused, wanting you to really drag out the game and then play your big bodies, remove your opponent's board, and then after that overwhelm them with large bodies all at once in a couple of turns. I think the playstyle of Queen is very annoying to play against, especially if you don't have cards that allow you to take from your own life. So if you're not playing red or you're not playing yellow with Smoothie, these kind of leaders have a slightly better time against Queen. But even then, if Queen is able to play well and draw out the game very long, continuously heal, then you would be in trouble. But I think the main reason that Queen isn't really popular is not just the timeout rules, but also his matchup into red green law is not fantastic, and the playstyle of it is not super fun to play in my opinion. It requires you to drag out games very long, and it's something like Rebecca, except the win con is quite dependent on you drawing your large bodies, but you don't have the same consistency tools as Rebecca. You aren't able to draw 2 cards every turn with your leader effect, for example, until very late in the game, and you always have to play with a very small hand size, so it does really feel like playing on the edge. And if you're unlucky, like you end up with situations where you have like 6 hand cards and all of them have no counter, and so you can't discard to use your leader effect anyway, and that makes it very, very difficult as well. All in all, I think of the new leaders, these 3 are probably the best, but none of them really crack it into that S plus tier, at least in Japan. Arguably, Rebecca is one of the big 5, which I will talk a little bit about later. But in Japan, there was, in Asia in general, there was like a big 5 of decks where if you couldn't compete with these decks, you couldn't really be considered a top tier deck or something that would top consistently. And I will review what those other 4 decks are later. But let's talk a little bit more about the other 3 OP04 leaders that are coming as well. The next one I want to talk about is VV. So VV is actually probably somewhere around here. I've been following the CS results very closely after every tournament, and every tournament I see red blue VV 7-2 didn't make it to top card, so it's very, very sad to see that be a very consistent trend. But I think the deck is actually very powerful, and he has a very good control, and at the same time I think control as well as at the same time a little bit of aggro in terms of the playstyle. So the deck builds would revolve around more towards the blue side of things. So you would see decks running Nami or Perona or Do Flamingo blocker, and then they would also be running Sansen Sekai 3000 Worlds, the new Red Rock card, as well as cards like Radical Beam, the Happiness Punch, Chopper. So naturally the deck would have like 20 different targets for Nami already, and then on top of that they would have control tools like the Chaka, which is on when attacking minus 3k power to 1 unit, then KO a 0 power unit. And then you could also combo that with 5 cost Mariko. Some lists were also running the 5 cost Pell. Other things that were staples for this deck were the Soge King or the 7 cost Do Flamingo, both of which would increase your tempo a lot by bouncing a 6 or 7 cost unit, and then the 9 cost Mihawk as well. And some lists were also running the 10 cost Kaido. So the deck was very much a blue deck with some additional red tools. Sanji, for example, was also good because you could 2 rested Dawn on him from your leader effect. So you could Sanji, then use your leader effect to give the Sanji rush, make him a 4 cost 7k rush unit, plus because you do have that 5th life, even though you are a 4 life leader, it doesn't hurt as much as well. Overall though, I think the matchup into yellow is really bad, because of the fact that you can't really aggro fast enough and you lose that leader swing every turn. And other than that, the Whitebeard matchup is not great unless you really draw all of the removal like a real blue deck. But especially in Japan with consecutive Newgate, it does get a bit problematic to remove all of those at once. I think in the Western meta with only 1 Newgate available, it might be a little bit better because you can consistently 3000 Worlds or use Mihawk to remove, for example, the 5 cost Luffy or the 7 cost Ace repeatedly. But at the same time, it may not have enough just firepower to get through all of Whitebeard's hand cards. The last two leaders that I wanted to talk about are both Purple Yellow Crocodile as well as Isho. So first off, I think Purple Yellow Crocodile actually did win a few locals over here. He does have a bit of a strange in-between kit because he does want to use yellow cards like the 8-cost Karakuri as well as the 9-cost Yamato. But other than that, it's not actually a lot of yellow. It's quite a purple deck in terms of construction mostly. I think in terms of the yellow parts of this deck, the decks I saw were mostly using the Katakuri and Yamato, and then maybe they were running Beige and the 4-cost blocker Sanji. Some of them were running 4-cost Cracker for additional aggro, and of course the 3-cost Beige is just a fantastic trigger as well. What I saw mostly on Twitter was decks that revolved around the Baroque Works engine with the Miss Valentine Searcher. They were also using that to just keep drawing their hand cards. Miss Valentine, Miss All Sunday. Mr. 4 was used in order to get free defense on your opponent's turn. So you Dawn -1, get a 7k blocker, and then you get 1 Dawn back as well. And you can use that Dawn in order to use counter events too, like Narikabra Arrow or the Blast Breath. Or my favorite combo was always using Hell's Judgment into Blast Breath or Narikabra Arrow, which is a really strong amount of defense for just 2 Dawn open. Other than that, the 8-cost new Crocodile SR is really powerful too, being able to heal for free essentially late game, because Dawn -2 on 10 Dawn, the next turn you're going to add 2 Dawn during the Dawn phase anyway. So if you do get to 10 Dawn and keep spamming the Crocodiles, it is a bit frustrating to deal with. On top of that, being able to discard your non-counter cards in hand in order to continue cycling to get to your key cards is also really good. So all in all, very strong deck in general. However, it did still have a few issues, especially against decks like Red Green Law and Zorro. I feel like those two matchups were pretty much instant lose for this deck. And I think in my experience playing Red Green Law throughout the whole of set 4, I did face a few Purple Yellow Crocodiles. I think I've not lost a single game against it, because it's really just a very tough matchup. Because purple on its own and yellow on its own already struggle with Red Green Law, and then put them together and it's even tougher. So it is an issue when you can't really hang out with the big boys like I mentioned earlier. It doesn't have the best Katakuri matchup either because of the 10-cost Mum. It doesn't have the best Zorro matchup either because of the aggro. So not being able to deal with any of that means that it doesn't really get the chance to sit up in the higher tiers. Okay, and then last but not least is Isho. I think Isho is very square in the unplayable tier at the moment. At first, I think people were considering Isho to be fairly powerful because of the fact that he does have that synergy with black cost reduction and green's KO effects. I think the main issue is because green's KO effects all rely on rested characters, and that gives you a lot less agency as to what to KO and what to remove. So it's always one or the other condition with Isho. You either have to discard a card or you have to wait for them to already have attacked you once before you can KO with a green character like X-Drake or Krieg, for example. And then because of that, you aren't really able to keep up with a lot of other decks. Not to mention, again, being 4-life leader means that against Zorro and against Red Green Law, it's just a huge struggle to maintain your hand size or maintain a healthy amount of life cards into the later stages of the game. That being said, I'm sure someone will be able to cook eventually and find a way to make Isho a playable leader, but at the moment with the current card pool, it just doesn't seem like something that's possible. Okay, so that is the state of the new 6 leaders that are coming. Rebecca, Flamingo, Queen, Vivi, Crocodile, and Isho. I think out of the top tier here, these are probably able to be swapped around a little bit. But based on Japan and Asia's format right now, it was definitely around something like this instead, where Rebecca was definitely the clear best leader out of all these 6. So this is also because at the same time, Rebecca took a while to solve for players, whereas Doflamingo was kind of easy to figure out, oh, let's just play the film engine. And then at the start of the set, it was definitely something like this instead. But over time, once people figured out, oh, this is how you play Rebecca, it suddenly became really good at 2. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the undeniable top 4 decks in the format in Japan, as well as what I think it will end up being in the West as well. So obviously, we still have the red Newgate. Newgate is definitely still very strong. Even in the West, I've been looking at the tournament results. I've been keeping track of how he's been doing, even post restrictions. And I saw a very funny tweet saying Pre-restrictions, Newgate actually won less or topped less tournaments than he did after the restrictions, which is really funny in hindsight. I honestly think that out of the 3 restrictions that were given, probably 4-cost Marco didn't need to get hit. The other 2 were probably a little bit fair. Radical Beam is very, very strong of a card. The 9-cost Newgate is a bit frustrating to play against, especially if they drop consecutive ones. But in Japan, in Asia, we were able to learn how to play around it. Still, it was the most consistent deck in format because of the fact that you do take 2 draws every turn. So it was still going to be one of the top decks anyway. And I think you can see in the West, based on the results as well, that the issue is not those 3 cards specifically. It's just Whitebeard himself is the strongest man in the world. And you aren't going to be able to beat him just because you've taken away some of his tools. End of the day, I think even in the West, even with the new cards and everything that are coming out, Whitebeard is probably still going to be one of the best decks in format. And he's going to be joined on that platform by other decks like Red Zorro. I think Red Zorro, in terms of the Japanese meta, the Whitebeard version was very popular and much more used as well. So this version using the 5-cost Marco, the Teach, as well as the Izo Searcher, along with Buggy and Dadan, compared to the Nami, Buggy, Dadan version. The Izo version was just a lot more consistent. But I foresee that in the OP04 meta, we'll probably see a lot more of the Nami, Dadan, Buggy version, so that you can keep up the pressure with things like your Rush Zorro as well as your Rush Luffy, and then having the 5-cost Marco be a tech card that you, if you need to draw into it, you'll probably mulligan to try and find it. For example, in the Mirror or in the Red-Green Law matchup, you would probably do that. In terms of the new red cards for OP04, you don't actually get a lot of buffs in general. All of the cards are very focused around the Alabasta mechanics, which are like reduce your leader's power, and then after that you have a certain effect after that. So all of these don't really help any of the leaders. The only card that you will see used very frequently from the new OP04 set is the anti-mana kick cost, which is the 0 cost discard 1 card to give 3000 counter. And despite that card existing, it doesn't really buff any of the existing decks too much. You can technically use it as a replacement for a 2k counter in decks like Whitebeard or Zorro, but at the same time, for Zorro, you would prefer to have a 2-cost unit rather than a 0-cost event, I think, in general. You would just have to throw down your bricks instead to like put them on the board or anything like that in order to get rid of them in hand. But at the same time, I think it is what it is. Having the lack of Radical Beam has also made Zorro a little bit more aggressive. I've seen the event list where Zorro are running 0 events total, and people aren't going to attack the 5-cost Marco anyway. So running 0 events is just like a bluff. You know, you can just don't attack the Marco, and then if you don't attack the Marco, he never needs to burn an event, right? So it's whatever. Zorro is still going to be a very powerful leader. The main issue with Zorro is that his matchup into these 2 leaders are not very good. The Rebecca and the Flamingo, as well as his matchup into the yellow Katakuri is not fantastic either. So the issue with the Zorro matchup there is just not being able to survive against these specific leaders, but his matchup into Red-Green Law as well as the Whitebeard is still pretty positive. So a lot of people will definitely still playing him. On top of that, of course, his high roll is very easy to achieve. It's tough to deal with as well, being able to handle the consistent aggro. You can always pull out the bullshit, the Diablo Jambe, Fiery Doll, hit you for 14, like 20k unblockable or some shit. So he always will have a place in the meta. But I think other than that, Katakuri receives a lot of buffs in OP04. I do have a video coming up with the new deck list that you expect Katakuris to be running, but basically now he's much more consistent of a deck. He has a new 4-cost 5k blocker that is also off trigger and also searchable off pudding. On top of that, instead of the poor 2k counters that he had earlier, having to run the pudding as well as the 2-cost Sanji, now he gets upgrades in Beige as well as Amanda, which give him a fighting chance into Red-Green Law too. So Amanda especially is a very strong card to help with the Red-Green Law matchup and makes it a lot less sacky. You're able to starve out the Red-Green Law and then remove his board to prevent him from getting early shambles and stem a little bit of that early aggression too, which makes him very, very good as well. I think along with all those buffs, that does put him around the best deck in format line, probably somewhere here or here, depending on the pilot as well. And not only that, Katakuri is one of the easier decks to pilot too, especially in OP04 where you can just play everything on curve. So you can just play, for example, Pudding into 4 cost, into 6 cost Parasparrow, into 7 mum or Katakuri, into 10 mum. Like, it's very, very straightforward, the line of play. Like, you really don't have to think too much about it when it comes to playing Katakuri. And not only that, you also have the luck aspect of hitting trigger units off life. So if you hit 5 triggers, it's just way too strong. Like, you just pop out 5 units out of nowhere for free, and the tempo change is very, very huge. So Katakuri is probably one of the best decks in the format in OP04, especially towards the end of the format in O4, where people were realizing that the matchup into Whitebeard is actually not as bad as it was in OP03. But this also may change depending on how many more rush version Whitebeards you see. So Strawbeard was also coming up towards the end of OP04. Some of my friends were playing it as well and did win flagships with it. And that version of Strawbeard is very, very aggressive, very tough to deal with for Katakuri too. And then lastly, to wrap up the top tier of OP04, we have the Red Green Law, my boy, my favorite deck, my current deck as well, even in OP05. Shambles is very strong of an effect, being able to flood your board and then after that replay your searches to consistently regain value or to cheat out units with much less dawn than you're supposed to, is all very, very strong. Being able to consistently maintain hand size by reusing your Namis, your Bonnies, having a lot of blockers is very strong, especially against Katakuri, against Flamingo, against Newglade. Having a very wide board is very good. Having cards like the Restand Law, being able to attack multiple times in a turn, being able to keep up that aggression, having your Rush Zorro, your Rush Luffy's, your Radical Beam, your Punk Gibson for all of your defensive options, your blockers. It's just a very all-around good deck. I think Red Green Law in general has been very, very solved. I mean, the deck is looking the same since OP02 until now. Like, everyone is running a very similar list with a very simple core of 40 cards, and then the last 10 are probably the tech slots. But the tech slots are also what makes the pilot stand out from other Red Green Law players as well. I think in Singapore especially, we have a very strong line of Red Green Law players that are consistently topping multiple tournaments. I think Red Green Law in general also allows the pilot to shine with their skill. Personally, I didn't do very well at the previous CS, but hoping to do much better at next month's CS round 2 in Singapore too. And I will also probably be bringing the Red Green Law to that tournament. In general, I think the top 4 would probably look something like this. So Red Green Law, in terms of his matchup spreads right now, his matchup into Katakuri is really good, and into Zorro is not very good. And into Whitebeard, I haven't played against the new post-restriction Whitebeard yet, but I would assume it should be a little bit more even. The main reason Red Green Law struggled into Whitebeard previously is consecutive Newgate is actually really tough to deal with as Red Green Law. But other than that, if it's only one Newgate that you have to deal with, I can foresee it being a much easier matchup. Other than that, the matchup into Queen as well as Flamingo is very good. The Queen is not able to deal with the multiple 5k swings due to the small hand size, and Flamingo is also a little tough to manage. Flamingo can win this matchup with cards like the Sugar as well as Punk Gibson and the 4-cost Uta blocker, which can be a very big thorn in the Law side, but other than that, it is still a pretty positive matchup for the Law. Meanwhile, the Rebecca matchup is really tough for Law to deal with, similar to Red Zorro, because of the requirement to have that full board. Rebecca is able to KO a lot of the stuff that you have, like your Namis and your Choppers with her Kyros or Leo. And then basically all of your deck is within range of Olympus plus Leo or Kyros, because that is a total of KO 5 cost. So that makes that matchup really difficult, on top of not being able to get extra cards from your life until the Rebecca starts hitting you like at turn 5 or 6. That makes the matchup pretty tough. So that's the reason why at the start of the near the end of OP04, this was probably the big 5. But I don't foresee Red Zorro being as popular in Japan, and I also foresee the other decks like Queen being more popular because of wanting to try new things, as well as seeing Japanese results with Queen still being successful. And not only that, I also think Crocodile and Nami are very good matchups into the Rebecca. So it may not end up being at the S plus tier like it was in the East. The video was getting a little bit on the longer side, so just wanted to cut it off here and then continue on in another part. Thank you guys again so much for watching. I hope you guys have good pulls for your OP04 cards and have a good time at your pre-releases. Really enjoy the OP04 meta. It is a lot more diverse than OP03, and it was probably one of the most fun metas that I had taken part in so far. Really looking forward to OP05 turning out to be hopefully equally as diverse or even better as well. Thank you guys again so much for watching Friendos and Randos. Have a great day ahead and peace out.